My son sold all my husband's war medals for $5.00, but he called them junk from the past, so I showed him the deed he forgot was still in my name. You and these dusty medals, both should have been buried with Dad. They smell like old war and wasted time. My son spat the words before me, waving the medals like a tawdry showpiece. A cruel clatter echoed across the yard as he tossed them into a plastic bin. If anyone wants this old table, I'll throw in those rusty medals free. Junk from the past. Memories don't pay bills. The air pulsed with laughter. Strangers cradled my husband's valor in their hands, as though they were nothing more than cracked bottle caps. I stood silent. The Nevada sun burned the tops of folding tables laden with every relic of my marriage and motherhood. My wedding album, his dog tags, photos from the hospital room, his letters from deployment, each item discounted to $1 or less. My granddaughter filmed the scene, cherishing the moment for TikTok. "Selling Grandma's past," she whispered for her followers. A woman in the crowd inspected the medals. "Are they real?" she asked uncertainly. My son smirked and replied coldly, "Yes, all real, but worth nothing. Who needs war trophies when you can have cash?" Children pulled along parents, stopping to examine piles of tools, china, and uniforms. One man picked up the old portrait of my husband, his face drawn in sepia. He sneezed at the dust and dropped it, saying, "Looks like something from your attic." Another laughed and said, "She must have lost her mind holding onto these relics for decades." Behind me, my granddaughter shifted nervously. I could feel the phone's glow against my cheek. She tapped to tag the sale as veteran sale. I closed my eyes, a silent plea escaping into memory. Please let dignity remain where it still might. My son cleared his throat, raised his phone higher, and spoke again. "Let's make this sale more funny. Buy a chair, take everything free with it, memories, medals, and all. Government gave him medals, I give them away. No sentimental attachments." The crowd chuckled. My friend Martha gasped, stepping forward. She tried to say something, but the noise swallowed her voice. I nodded at her. Something cracked in my chest, a promise breaking. I inhaled and walked forward slowly, the ground wobbling beneath me. He hadn't seen, no one had expected me to speak. I took his mic, and his face snapped toward me. The crowd hushed. My granddaughter froze the camera. I cleared my throat. "You can buy my belongings for $1. You can strip memories and toss them aside. You can discard me like faded newspaper." My voice shook as tears threatened to toast my heat. I paused. The silence tasted heavy. "But if you believe I am worthless..." I held the microphone steady. His smile vanished. I looked across the crowd, at Martha's eyes glistening. A neighbor's hand trembled. I lowered my voice, and every word cut clear. "Then you have forgotten what I built." A sharp gasp echoed as I spoke the next words. 30 years teaching at the university, patented a formula that saves lives. Studied in labs and lent my hands to raise students. That is my legacy, not to be sold for spare change. My husband's medals lay scattered. Some had vanished into strangers' bags, but grief does not evaporate with commerce. I dropped the microphone. The crowd drifted back. Some were ashamed, some nodded at me. He called it business. I called it a reckoning. With my husband's wedding portrait braced tightly under my arm, I turned and walked back across the grass. The balloons bobbed overhead, mocking me with their cheer. The sale signs fluttered. But I carried something heavier. My worth does not rest in price tags. I breathed in the wind, inhaling memories no amount of dollars could buy back. I had known humiliation before. I have worn widowhood with quiet resilience for years. But this public display was deeper than grief. It was betrayal stamped in neon. Yet my resolve was rising. I lifted my chin, each step measured and purposeful, moving toward the house I had raised children in, not the tables packed with discount goods. They said the past should be hidden away, but I buried it in a deed and a will, not in trash. I remember his call sign, Valkyrie 7. That was my husband flying F-16s over Kosovo, protecting innocents under smoke and bomb blasts. When he disappeared during that mission, we held on to hope until the hospital called us to the airstrip. They carried him off the transport plane not in uniform but in a solemn flag-folded casket. The grief hit like shrapnel across my life. His medals came home later, one by one. Medal of Valor, campaign ribbons, commendations. each offering a chapter of his sacrifice. In the months before deployment, he gave me a small box of paper, a handwritten letter folded with love and certainty. He said, "If you are reading this, that means I never made it home. And I trust you, my heart. Please remember why this house exists, not for profit, but for memory. Do not ever sell off my medals, and do not transfer the house without your blessing. Keep them together, keep them safe, and remind our son what duty means." His words burned into me like truth. The will, my husband's final wish, was clear. The medal and the deed were sacred. He said the symbols of his service should not be bartered off or forgotten. It felt like destiny that he tied both the valor and the house to my stewardship. In the years that followed, every anniversary I opened that wooden box he carved with his initials. Inside lay the combat map, coffee-stained and frayed at the edges. It showed Flight Route Tango 2, over Pristina and toward enemy territory. It was where he radioed last, saying he'd return. A dozen cockpit photos of him with his squadron flashed a smile under helmet shields. There was the Medal of Valor in its velvet case, the citation folded with pride. I polished each ring and medallion weekly, whispered to them stories I refrained from telling our son. Yet now those same medals lay side by side with chipped pottery and dusty tea sets priced under $1. Each tag felt like a betrayal. I could almost hear his voice. "Do not let them bury my memories while I breathe through you." Sometimes I would open that box and run my fingers across his flight patches, still faded from years of washing, still carrying the smell of gasoline and jet fuel. I read notes he scribbled in the margins. "Protect the innocent. Get Sasa that ice cream the day he graduates." Every humiliation of today jarred with those promises. But why did I keep everything in one place? Because I knew I would outlive him. Because I believed memory should not vanish behind bricks and beams. I believed that one day someone reckless might strip the house and throw it into chaos, and I promised myself then I would stand guard. When he gave me that letter, he handed me more than paper. He handed me guardianship of legacy, both his valor and our home. And I have never relinquished it. I think of the day we buried him on the runway tarmac. The captain laid a wreath on the fuselage. The honor guard snapped to attention. The flag folded into a triangular shape. They presented it to me at the head of the coffin. I took it into my arms, tears soaking the fabric, and I told the airman, "He flew for us all. He died doing what he loved." That flag and that flag alone became my constant companion. It draped every picture in the house. My son, at 6, asked me once why I slept beside a folded triangle. I said, "Your father carried that flag in missions. Now it holds his honor. You know that he loved you." Over the years, I received letters from his squadron. They describe how his jet engaged enemy craft, how he rescued a wounded pilot under fire. One wrote, "He saved us all that night." Those stories made my chest ache, not for what he did, but for what was almost lost. History can vanish, soldiers fade, but even now I speak for him. I preserve his memory. The will he left, "Don't sell medals, don't sell the house," was never about owning land. It was about owning conscience. He wanted me to direct any changes, any transfer, personally. That deed sits unaltered in my safe. He made me custodian, guardian of home and memory. I placed the deed inside that same wooden box many years ago. The document yellowed with age, border embossed with the county crest. I touch it when grief ebbs, like a compass guiding my resolve. I traced before today how he signed his name, how he said, "This home remains in her hands." My son thought the medals were junk from the past. He did not know valor is not measured in dollars. He did not know that war memory lives beyond ash and ruin. He thought that honoring a man was optional, but to me it was the heart of everything. So I stood before that sail, silent. I stood behind that letter, silent. I stood as the box warmed in my lap, echoes of who he was pulsing beneath my palm. Memory is not an object to be bought or sold. It is not a legacy until someone chooses to remember. And I have chosen to protect every comrade's photo, every letter, every combat-torn patch, every flight-touched piece of metal, because those medals were the bones of his sacrifice, and the deed is the backbone of my strength. I knew today he would be ashamed, not that they sold the medals, but that they believed memory was expendable. He wanted dignity. He wanted a guardian. He wanted someone who remembers what pockmarked valor costs and not let history die twice. That is what I inherited, and I will not let it break. I dusted my slippers on the grass outside the tent, and I heard someone whisper, "She lost him too early." I lifted the lid on that box again and nodded to the metal's reflection, because a lifetime of devotion lives in those rings and ribbons. And today may mark the low point when strangers scooped dollar tags across our past. But tomorrow it marks the beginning of reckoning. Because memory can be rescued, even from garbage. My daily life had morphed into a surreal performance inside my own home, a home I built, loving every corner, now filled with echoes of someone else's ambition. When my husband died, I expected grief. I did not expect to become invisible. My son, freshly emboldened by his success in tech-flipping investments, decided to downsize the staffing. He fired our housekeeper, an elderly woman who had served tea and cleaned halls for years, and instructed me to take over cooking, cleaning, and laundry. He called it sharing responsibilities. The phrasing stung. Not appreciation, but duty. A sentence chained to pity. Within months, he pitched the ultimate idea. Airbnb, themed as a veteran getaway. A picturesque Nevada ranch where visitors could sleep in restored barracks furniture, tour memorabilia, and meet the living widow. I was to become the centerpiece, always sitting on the front porch, regaling guests with war stories. A morning show host for grief, a spectacle packaged in khaki and flag bunting. I remember the day he showed me the marketing brochure, sun-drenched images of smiling visitors, old uniforms lining the walls, metal cases on display, and beneath it, in small print, storyteller available upon request. That storyteller was meant to be me. I swallowed the bile rising in me. I looked around at the photos of my husband's flight missions, the letters pinned to the gallery wall, the echo of his voice embedded in every space. I asked quietly, "Did it ever feel exploitative to you?" He snorted. "It's a tribute," he said. "You should be honored. We are preserving his memory." Preserving as long as it made bank, I thought, preserving him on a cash register. When I protested gently that memories are not theme parks, he snapped at me. "Mom, you should be grateful. I haven't shipped you off to a nursing home, unlike some people I know." His words coated the room like acid. Congratulations turned insult. "You offered me fate worse than being ignored," he added. "A nursing home would have at least been straightforward." I kept quiet, but indignation festered. Some evenings I would linger in the study where his desk once stood. I missed the sweet whir of his ideas on paper. His notebooks of notebook sketches, now dusty, gathering mildew. A kind neighbor stopped by often and asked if I needed help. I said no. Help would require admitting I was entering a house I no longer controlled. He hired contractors to take away doors, demolish wallpaper, replace rugs. He fitted military-themed decor. Dollar signs replaced devotion. He showed friends around, describing how he was turning the tragedy into revenue. I watched strangers pat my back, expecting tears of gratitude, not tears of rejection. One bitter afternoon, I stood in the hallway and whispered to my husband's picture, "I am not your prop." And I pressed a hand to the wall where I used to hang his uniform. Now empty hooks dangled like gibbet hooks. Finally, I could not bear it. I told him firmly, "This house is mine. Not your museum, not your entertainment center, not your revenue model." He laughed and centered his stack of brochures higher. "You're being dramatic," he said. "I'm giving you purpose." I looked at him through the window. I inhaled the scent of sawdust and stale memories. "Your version of purpose is forcing me to play dead in my own life." He glared at me, but for the first time I met his eyes. I saw fear, not fear of me, but of losing control. I turned away, my skirts swishing as I walked past dressers he had varnished. I saw taped outline areas marked selfie spot. I thought of calling the police. I thought of taking back the pictures and files, but I climbed the stairs to the old bedroom and closed the door behind me. In that room, I opened the wooden box I treasured, the combat map, the medals, the letters. They whispered to me that day was coming, a reckoning built not on horror, but on proof. Because I had done more than stand still, I had remembered. I had cataloged the letters of service, the receipts of trophies, the diary pages with coordinates and love notes. He believed he could convert sacrifice into tourism, but he underestimated legacy. That night, in bed, the train of his snoring sounded like a blowtorch shaping the final straw. I wrote in my journal, I did not raise a storyteller for sale. I raised someone who knew why virtue matters. I resolved to give his plan a date, not for launch, but for dismissal, because the story he was going to sell had already been stolen. I would reclaim it on my terms. I lay awake for hours, listening to the air vent hum. I thought of the gardeners who repaired backyard fences, the electrician who replaced lamps. They asked about the new plan. Some sighed, some mumbled condolence. I understood. Nostalgia is a product until a widow refuses to sell it. So I prepared. I stocked my cane, wore my best blue dress with the medal pinned above my heart. I rehearsed words, because in the next act, they would realize I was neither decoration nor casualty. I was the custodian. And tomorrow, someone would have to reckon with that. I pressed record with the hidden phone tucked in my cardigan sleeve, trying to steady my breath. The camera angle was shaky, but it captured everything. The cards scattered on tables, people passing judgment, and my son belittling my life's history. He barked into the phone. Choose a chair, and you get Dad's medals, free. Rusty relics, past is dead, move on. He spat that line as though history were infectious. The crowd laughed, but the laughter had an edge, as though they were complicit in defiling my husband's honor. My heart tapped steadily as the medal cases rattled on the folding table like they were trash bags full of yesterday's grief. The live views doubled by the minute. Strangers from Tucson, Reno, even Sacramento tuned in. Comments scrolled, so disrespectful. Where's the widow? He's selling legacy like yard waste. It hurt, but I held the phone tighter. Then a man stepped into frame. An elderly veteran in a Navy cap paused by the medal box. He picked up one of the campaign ribbons and blinked. He looked at my son, then at me, then back again. The streaming commenter noticed. That guy looks familiar. To my surprise, he spoke. That was my squadron commander. He saved my life under fire. Those medals cannot be sold. The crowd quieted, phones lowered, people stared. My son's expressions cracked. The veteran clicked his tongue and added, "You don't sell valor like old junk." I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I slipped forward behind a table. I parted the medal boxes with my gloved fingers and reached into my purse. I pulled out a crisp copy of the deed to the property, showing my name, dated decades ago. A scanned copy of my husband's handwritten will, outlining his will, do not sell medals, do not transfer title without wife's consent. A letter from the Nevada Veterans Association stating these medals are classified as historical military artifacts, not eligible for personal sale. And the letter I sent earlier that morning to the Stolen Valor Task Force reporting illegal sale of federally protected medals. I straightened up, my voice low but resolute. I recorded this live stream. At that revelation, gasps spiraled. I continued, "You're watching an ongoing violation, but if you look here..." I placed the deed on the folding table, letting my name glare in the glaring sun. My name is on the title, and this house remains mine, despite what was promised or plotted. My son opened his mouth to protest, but the veteran's eyes bored into his soul. "Broken promises don't wash away service," he remarked. The live stream captured it all. Me walking across the scene with the letter of referral, the deed, the veteran's badge glinting in the sun, my granddaughter's phone angled upward, watching my hands tremble, but not enough to make me drop the documents. Comments on the stream erupted with support. "Worthy widow, shame him, country sees it all. Justice via live stream." Some neighbors hid their faces, some closed their wallets. Then the veteran stepped forward, salute crisp but sorrowful. "I stand with her. You insult Dad's memory." He pointed at my medals. "Those honors belong to a man who died doing his job. He didn't die for you to sell them off." I nodded at him, and he placed a hand on my shoulder. I stood firm. My son's supporters, friends who came to witness, murmured awkward words. He turned off the main camera in frustration, but the hidden phone kept streaming. I pressed stop, only after I'd recorded the entire display, from my entrance to the veteran's interjection to my son's stunned face. I gathered the documents, folded them carefully, and looked at him directly. "This house, these medals, they were never yours to give away. The live stream stopped buffering. The silence afterward was heavier than the desert heat. I walked out of the frame, weaving through tables, dodging bags of discarded items. I heard someone call my name across the yard, but I ignored it. I felt the weight lift, not because I'd spoken, but because someone finally listened. They called it business. I called it betrayal. But today they saw truth, and live-streamed or not, honor was not for sale. People walked toward me as I reached the driveway edge. A few reached out to touch the deed. The veteran walked toward me with my medals, handing them back gently, thumbing dust from metal ribbons. I accepted them and placed each piece to my heart. He whispered, "I will store these for you." I nodded. A hand closed my granddaughter's live stream phone. I turned and simply walked away, the metal box tucked safely beneath my arm. I had dismantled the sale without yelling. I had shared the will without shouting. I had exposed the betrayal in plain sight, and I recorded it all. The morning after the live stream, my phone buzzed with messages, some sympathetic, some outraged. By afternoon, a uniformed Nevada state trooper knocked on my door. He introduced himself quietly and said, "Ma'am, we've received your referral. We need to speak." On my living room floor, I laid out the live stream video, the letter from the Nevada Veterans Association, and the Stolen Valor report. The trooper watched my son's voice calling the medals junk, and the moment the veteran intervened, declaring, "Those honors cannot be sold." Within hours, state detectives arrived. They collected tattered labels, plastic bin debris, remnants of my husband's medals. One asked me solemnly, "Did he have permission to offload this property?" I said no. I handed them the veteran's testimony and the veteran's letter confirming those medals are protected under federal statute. Selling them without authorization is a crime. They also requested my bank statements. On the kitchen table, they unsealed a printed ledger showing irregular withdrawals, hundreds of dollars, labeled "for mom," but actually spent at casinos and sports books. Some weeks he had emptied our joint account, money I should have used for mortgage or groceries. The detective leaned in, eyebrows pinched. "Your son's claims that these were helpful withdrawals don't align with your actual expenses. That raises elder exploitation concerns." When he said that, I felt a curious calm. I had recorded the live stream, preserved the deeds and letters, and my accounts were transparent. I was his mother, not his ATM. Later that day, I filed my own statement. I do not consent to any sale or removal of property from this house. I was not retired to a museum. I remained the legal owner. Any actions without my consent are void, not authorized. A reporter from the local Reno Associated Press called, asking for comment. I agreed to speak on camera. I learned memories do not expire, but betrayal does reverberate. My husband's medals were not souvenirs, they were sacred. "A tribute stolen can be recovered legally," the headline ran. "Widow turns veteran home into legal fortress, citing title deed and veterans law." A news crew came to record the metal detection in the yard, the seized metal boxes, my statement before flashing cameras. I stood steady in the glow of the spotlights. Empathy was palpable. Concessions were being made in real time. At the Criminal Investigation Office, I listened as detectives informed me they will refer the case to federal prosecutors. Selling authentic military valor items without authorization carries both criminal and civil penalties. They warned my son could face fines, restitution, and potential sanctions under the Stolen Valor Act. That evening, my son burst into my kitchen, red-faced. He had overheard about the probe. "You could ruin me," he said, voice quivering. I looked at him and said, with measured calm, "The only thing I ruined is a facade, one built on betraying your father's memory. I will not let that house become a monument to your ambition." He glared. I continued, "This house will become what it was always meant to be. Not a tourist trap, but a sanctuary, a haven for veterans, not heirs who believe legacy is disposable." He scoffed, but the weight of the law sat between us. He knew the deed was intact, the will legally binding, my statements on record. The next day, a security envelope arrived from the law firm of a former student of mine, now a nonprofit attorney specializing in elder rights. They had opened a trust for the property and were preparing documents to transfer title to the new organization, Nevada Women Veterans Shelter. The papers awaited my signature next to his. It felt strange, free, even. the house, the garden, the medals, even the small boxes of honors would now serve widows, daughters, and veterans in need, not his profit. News stations showed me reviewing documents on my porch, pen in hand over printed trust papers. The reporter asked, "Are you ready to give up your home?" I replied, "Home is where honor resides. Legacy is not taken, it is granted, with conscience, and it will serve those of dignity." By dusk, federal investigators picked up evidence from the sale site. Medals were removed for refurbishment and return, the rest cataloged as evidence. Prosecutors scheduled a preliminary hearing. My son's phone rang nonstop. I watched him stare at the walls I once painted with him. He finally crumpled to his knees and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't see." I stood above him. I did not speak. I could not afford softness, not now. The case file for elder financial abuse grew. Social workers called about reimbursements to the estate. The local community demanded an apology. The public pressure collapsed the rental project. Hosts on Airbnb automatically delisted the home. Within 30 days, the booking site attached a message. This home is no longer listed for rent. It is now a protected Veterans Heritage Site. I sat in my study, once nearly stripped of meaning. Now the walls buzzed with calls for interviews. The Vada Veterans Shelter asked me to speak at their international fundraiser. I stiffened at first, then remembered the letter he wrote me years earlier, his vision, before the rubble of war consumed him. They say crime doesn't pay. In his case, greed cost him inheritance, safety, and the right to display the medals he once collected without shame. They called it business. I called it betrayal. He paid, in law, in reputation, in solemn regret. I stood firm in court hearings. I gave testimony in defense of the trust. Elder rights advocates showed up. Federal prosecutors nodded gravely. My name atop the title deed was proof, but the will my husband left formed the cornerstone. A small courtroom Q&A aired on statewide news. A grief counselor interviewed me. "Why do this?" I answered gently, "Because I love him still." History matters when you preserve it, not pawn it. That trust agreement endorsed me as guardian of home and memory. I signed it with an unshaking hand. I left the courthouse under a midweek sky. I walked back through my neighborhood, past the sale tables now bare, past neighbors who gave solemn nods in passing. My son avoided eye contact. I held up my chin. He had lost more than a sale. He lost certainty. And I regained more than a house. I regained purpose. My husband's flag now flies again above the porch. The trust agreement hangs in my study. I return that deed to its rightful purpose. I have chosen honor over spite. And they will measure the cost of betrayal against the price of redemption. The day of the memorial ceremony dawned clear and crisp. I stepped onto the lawn before my house, but it no longer felt mine alone. A simple stage stood beneath an arch of flags. Local veterans, neighbors, volunteers, and media gathered. I stood beside Thomas, a young former student of my husband who now stood as the community's voice of support. The breeze carried the scent of wild sagebrush, grand and unyielding. An organizer approached me and whispered, "You'll speak after the keynote. You are our guest of honor." My pulse fluttered, not with nervousness, but a steady determination. The ceremony began with the playing of taps. Heads bowed, a retired colonel folded a flag with solemn precision and handed it to a young color guard recruiter. Everyone clapped softly as the notes faded. The MC introduced a speech on behalf of local veterans' families. Then, approaching the podium, I heard someone's voice say, "Please welcome Mrs. Harper." I stepped forward. Looking out through the crowd, I saw familiar faces, friends who once shared tears over my loss, neighbors who offered casseroles and condolences, and new visitors seeking meaning in the event. I raised the microphone to my lips and let silence fall for a heartbeat. They say a soldier's worth is measured in medals. I say it is measured in memory and truth, I began. I once lost my husband to the fog of war. That grief changed me, but it did not destroy me. Today I stand before you not in mourning, but in purpose. My voice trembled small as I added, I lost him, yes, but I will not lose honor, especially when betrayal comes from blood, not strangers. I spoke slowly, so each word landed. I watched, watching faces. No one frowned. They waited, because I learned something important. Legacy is not a gift to inherit. Legacy is a burden to carry, and not everyone deserves to carry it. The applause rang out, not polite or perfunctory, but real, resounding. Veterans stood, women dabbed at their eyes. In that moment, I realized the audience felt what I felt. Thomas then approached with a small box. He opened it before everyone. Inside lay my husband's Medal of Valor, polished and encased in velvet. He placed it gently on my open palm. "This medal," he said, turning to the crowd, "was nearly sold for $5 this week. Today, we restore it to honor where it belongs." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. The flag fluttered overhead as though applauding too. Then came the most difficult moment. My son stepped forward, head bowed, voice shaking. He said, "Mom, I am so sorry. I failed to honor what mattered most. I tried to turn our loss into something profitable, but I forgot the living memory had weight. Please forgive me." He reached for my hand. I did not flinch, but I also did not take it. I stepped back, a single nod the only concession I made. Silence and distance carried more meaning. I could have said many words, but silence served judgment. He had to earn the legacy, not demand it. Thomas leaned in and whispered quietly, "You did all the honoring. Let your silence say it all." I bowed my head. I let the applause return after a pause, but it was softer now, respectful, and letting my quiet speak. A local reporter asked, "Mrs. Harper, what message would you deliver to other families who might feel betrayed by those they raised?" I replied, "You don't need profit to preserve memory. You need pain to demand justice, and you need conviction to hold the deed, both the paper and the cause, until someone tries to bury you. Then you dig until the truth breathes again." In the crowd, I noticed a small boy wearing a miniature flight suit. His grandmother squeezed his hand. He waved shyly at me. I lifted his ribbon from the stage railing and pinned it above my chest. "For young dreamers," I said simply. As the ceremony ended, I descended the stage slowly, walking through the crowd. A casket of letters, medals, photos were carried alongside me, not in shame but in procession. At the edge of the circle, I paused beside my son. He looked up. Regret hung in his posture. I simply stepped aside and faced Thomas again. He offered his arm. I placed my hand lightly into his bent elbow, not surrendering, but choosing trust. The event concluded with a communal hymn and a bell toll, each chime lifting memory, not mourning. I breathed then, deeply. The ceremony succeeded not because I spoke volume, but because courage spoke quietly through each witness. At twilight, the medals lay protected in a display case, inside what would soon be a veterans center. The deed was recorded. The trust foundation was filed. The house no longer looked like mine, it looked like ours. But I understood now, legacy is not about ownership, it is about stewardship. And I had chosen. I sat in my study, the afternoon sun falling across framed diplomas, medals, and the deed that still bore my name. The air pulsed with anticipation. Today, everything changed. My lawyer, a gentle young woman named Emily, once the frail neighbor child my husband helped nurse back to health, sat across from me at the mahogany table. She had returned from law school, served at a nonprofit, and now dedicated her skills to restoring dignity where it had been broken. She slid a thick stack of papers toward me. At the top was the deed I signed decades ago. Below it, documents transferring ownership of my home, land, and all contents, valued at $1,200,000 to the newly formed nonprofit Nevada Women Veterans Shelter. Included were my husband's patented medical device plans, a co-invention he created to help injured veterans. The patent would now be held by the foundation. Emily explained, "This trust secures the house and the invention as assets for the shelter, rendered irrevocable. Your son is excluded per the original will." I looked at her, voice steady. Let that lesson echo. No one may claim legacy if they never claimed loyalty. Legal papers revealed that my son had withdrawn thousands of dollars from our joint account, ostensibly to help you. Those funds were traced to debts at a local casino. The financial records created a trail of elder exploitation, violation of fiduciary responsibility. He would now owe back taxes, face audits, and could be liable for civil restitution. Emily said, "The IRS flagged many withdrawals. You'll need to recover the funds for the trust. He cannot benefit from your estate." I nodded, feeling relief and grief intertwine. Relief that I would no longer bear the burden alone. Grief that he, my flesh and blood, betrayed protocol and trust. Emily stood to step aside. Then she added the final layer. A legal affidavit from the veteran who testified at the memorial, corroborating the invalidity of the medal sale. Additional affidavits arrived from family, friends, and neighbors. I would file for elder abuse and asset misappropriation. The trust would compel the transfer of usable funds back into the nonprofit. I signed each document: deed assignment, trust certification, patent transfer, all before the afternoon sun sank low. My husband's patent on battlefield first aid remained intact, but now it would serve wounded servicewomen and women veterans in need. I closed the ledger. I closed that chapter. Later that evening, during a filmed interview for a local broadcast, I said, "I've turned a betrayal into a birthplace of community. The house is no longer just a home. It is a legacy center, because no structure should hold yet another heart prisoner." Emily stood beside me, wearing both pride and quiet defiance. A reporter asked, "Will your son still receive anything?" I paused. My voice was soft but firm. He was offered inclusion to sign agreements, to acknowledge the truth. He declined. One cannot inherit what they do not honor. The demand from the IRS followed swiftly. They requested an explanation for the previous year's filings. Because he had misused funds as for mother's care, they would seek reimbursement that would strip him of financial benefit from his actions, even from inheritance of sentimental value. I felt vindicated, but not triumphant. I thought of my husband's words, "Keep his memory safe, even if betrayal hides behind kin." I looked around the study at his framed medals, restored now, and at the patent blueprint my finger traced. I whispered, "We're doing it, love." At my son's apartment door, Emily and I served last papers: foreclosure warnings, IRS notices, and a formal notice of breach of fiduciary duty. He stood in roomy defeat, glasses crooked. He stuttered through half-hearted apologies. Emily said nothing. She did not smile. She placed the documents in his hand. He opened his mouth, closed it. No excuses. I remained silent. Silent as my husband had asked. Silent as testimony, but resolute. I turned and closed the door behind us. Inside the house, I walked room to room. His childhood room, now a memorial corner. The living room, where dinner once smelled of roast, now a hall of volunteer thank-you notes. I touched a corner of the sewing table he used to build models. I heard the phone ring, return of fund recovery queries, documentary requests, sponsorship emails. I responded with a gentle, "Yes, the house is no longer for rent, it is for service." That night I sat at my desk, pen and paper in hand. I drafted a letter to participants in future programs at the shelter. To those who served, to those who loved them, and to those who will rise now. This house stands not because of cost, but because of conviction. My husband flew for freedom. Now you may enter here to find it in community. Months later, at the ribbon cutting for the Foundation's official center, Emily stood by my side. The structure gleamed behind us as local veterans and families gathered. My son appeared in the crowd, tilting his head. Our eyes met. He nodded. I nodded back. Then I returned to Thomas, who offered me the ceremonial scissors. I snipped the ribbon and walked through the threshold, stepping into a hall filled with gratitude, not regret. I had lost my husband to war. I lost my son's trust to greed. What remained was legacy, no longer tied to blood, but to service. I am neither monument nor martyr. I am steward. And my will ends here, not in memory of what I lost, but in honor of what I protect. Years have passed since the sale. The house that once echoed with betrayal now hums with purpose. The Nevada Women Veterans Shelter is alive. Rooms redolent of hope instead of hushed sorrow, laughter instead of regret. Women wrap hands in scrubbing stations. Children color at tables beneath patriotic banners. Community volunteers teach classes in gardens once filled with weeds. In the main hall, on the far wall above a long oak bench, hangs my husband's portrait. Beneath it, his original Medal of Valor sits encased in glass. Framed letters and photos fan out below, and carved into the plaque is one phrase emblazoned in brushed brass: "In honor of those who were never forgotten by those who remember." It catches the sunlight streaming through the window, as though the phrase itself breathes life back into memory. One morning, my great-granddaughter tugs at my skirt. She tilts her head and asks softly, "Will you forgive my father?" I pause by the framed displays, gently pat her head, and whisper back, "You have forgiven me for a long time, but forgiveness does not mean giving back trust." She nods solemnly and skips away to join other children playing in the courtyard. Thomas, the young veteran who helped me carry the cause, offers his arm. He guides me through the garden, where red poppies and wild sage bloom. Texas bluebonnets shade benches where survivors sit in quiet conversation. In that moment, I know the house is no longer mine, and it is more mine than ever. Guests wander past rooms once heavy with regret, a crafts workshop, a therapy corner, a library with books that belonged to my husband's bookshelves. In each corner, a volunteer stands ready. Some tear up when they see the medal display. Others read his letters and murmur with respect. The community comes often: school groups, local historians, casket bearers, old pilots who once served beside him. Many stop at the display wall. Some kneel for a moment. Some snap photos. No one kisses the medals. Instead, they touch the plaque, read the inscription, and leave with reverence. No more Airbnb banners hang in the yard. No more renter rules posted on old windows. Only children's laughter drifts on the breeze, blending with distant voices telling stories of camaraderie and healing. Once, a reporter asked me again, "Mrs. Harper, do you regret proceeding legally against your own son?" I thought of the rooms lined with letters of thanks from veterans, widows, volunteers, and replied, "The only regret is that it took betrayal for us to know what needed preserving." Some days I catch my reflection in the front window. I am older now, more lines, more quiet stories etched in my hands. But my spine is stronger, my eyes are brighter, my purpose unabated. Thomas and I often stop at the display wall. He looks at me and says softly, "You are its keeper." I smile. Keeper, guardian of honor, not just memory. I have forgiven in silence. But love and trust are not interchangeable. I opened the trust in full, not as grace, but as boundary. My son chose to walk away when he cast aside remembrance. A plaque beneath the photo reads simply, "Harper Veterans Legacy House." Sometimes I read it out loud. This house belongs to valor, not profit. I still open the wooden box each week in the sanctuary room. Inside lies the flight map from Kosovo, letters intertwined, a single flag folded on top. I don't touch the medals often. They live now in solemn dignity. But I hold the letters. I read the notes he wrote in the margins. Protect. Heal. Remember. I gather groups of veterans here often for reading circles or penny dinners. I tell them, our legacy is not in what we earned. It is in what we forgive, what we protect, and whom we choose to serve. They nod. They know. One afternoon, a young Marine approached with tears in her eyes. She tapped the medal case and said simply, This is worth more than your son could ever understand." We held silence together. I told her, "You have honor. Keep going." The local historians group asked me to speak at the legislature next week about preserving veterans' homes as service centers, not tourist curiosities. At my age, I expected less. But I accepted because the cause is greater than me. The house shimmers gold in the evening light. The flags rustle in a steady breeze. The garden smells of sage, lavender, memories, and morning coffee served in chipped mugs no one paid a dime for. Legacy is not in bricks. Legacy is in what we build on them. They sold my memories for $5, but I built them into a legacy worth millions, not in cash but in honor, and in the end, the legacy lived. If you think stories like this only happen in novels, take another look around. How many mothers are being drained of their dignity and their memories simply because they choose silence over screaming and remembering over revenge? I am not asking for pity. I just want them to remember. War may have taken the man I loved, but it was ingratitude that nearly stole the honor he died protecting. If you have ever loved someone who gave their whole life to family, share this story. If you are a child who once believed your mother had nothing left to give, look again. And if you want to hear more true stories from a grandmother who stayed silent for too long, subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because when a grandma finally speaks, the whole world should listen. See you in the next story, and remember, never call memory trash. when memory is the last thing keeping you human.